I'm well. How are you, Adam?
I'm doing really well. So you are out west, close to Portland. Where are you at exactly?
I'm technically in Beaverton, but I'm literally one half of a block from Portland. So I'm really close to Portland.
Cool. I wanted to start, I read your bio, I read your website, and it's just amazing. I wanted to start with a few minutes. Maybe you could just tell us your story and tell us about how you wound up here.
Sure. Well, I think that I think it's no accident that I ended up really focusing on relationships because the breakup of a very important relationship in my life really was very disruptive and traumatizing. When my parents started fighting and they ended up splitting up, and then I had a number of different losses. Just a couple of just being my brother and sister, who were in some ways like parents to me because they were quite a bit older than me. They left for college, so during all of this time, and so I really had that yearning to be connected and to feel a part of a family again. And I did create a family with my husband at the time, and we were married for a number of years. And but then things fell apart and we ended up divorcing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm recreating history. And I don't want my kids to have the same experience that I had. How do I do this differently? So I really tried to be really intentional about the whole process and making sure I knew how to be there for them and give them the support that they might need during that process, but also not abandon myself either. So I was fortunate enough that my first husband, he and I are not the angry couple, divorced couple. We both I guess what they call it is a good divorce. We were able to stay friends, and it takes two in order to do that. And so I feel very fortunate that my kid's dad was willing to take that approach. So yeah, we got lots of therapy, and the kids were in therapy, and we got support from others as well, and it really helped that transition. And now I'm remarried and have a step family of my own. And I am definitely remembering the things that didn't work so well for me when I was a kid in a step family, and not reactionary about that, but again, really being thoughtful about what happened and what was so hard for my stepmother and what was so hard for me, and trying to show some compassion for those different roles that we find ourselves in. So yeah, so I have a bigger family now. I have a husband and my three kids, two of whom live with me, one of whom is a little bit older and lives with my ex-husband. We live about 10 minutes apart. We spend all the holidays together. We sometimes take vacations together. So I think that has made this change so much easier on my kids than it was on me when I was a kid. Because again, I was 10 when that all started to happen, and my daughter was 10 when it happened in my family. So again, wanted to be really intentional about how we did things. And I'm pleased with how things turned out.
Yeah, that's a whole lot.
It's a whole lot.
Yeah. Why do you think, and we'll just jump right in, why do you think people recreate like these patterns? Like, you grow up and you're like, oh, I'll never make these mistakes. And then one day you wind up and you're like, oh my God, we're repeating history here.
Yeah. And, there can be so many different reasons for that. But oftentimes when we start new relationships as adults, we're trying to finish some business that wasn't completed with a caretaker or a parent or a significant person in our lives when we were younger. So oftentimes we're trying to get that love and get that acceptance that maybe we didn't get with that one parent when we were younger. So, but usually we're not really aware of that, and so when we're not aware of that need in us and that drive to connect in that way, then it really leads us, and we're not necessarily aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we repeat those patterns.
Yeah, it's crazy how that happens. I wanted to segue here into the internal family systems model because I know it's something you're really passionate about. And maybe you could start with defining what it is, maybe defining that terminology plus parts work and how this is different from like the traditional family system stuff that came out in the 70s with like addiction and stuff. Maybe we could have a pretty deep conversation about that, and then we'll segue into attachment type stuff, or if you want to do attachment first, whatever you want to do.
Sure. Yeah, either way is fine. I'd say that IFS has a lot of the, it really takes into account attachment. Attachment is really important in the IFS world, although we don't necessarily name it as such. But we are driven by that need to connect. From the cradle to the grave, we are drawn toward those deep connections, and especially when we're young, our survival depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of studies. I mean, there are a couple of famous ones. One is Harlow's study about the monkeys who chose a terry cloth wrapped wire mother over food because that created that sense of comfort and that sense of love that a child gets from a parent. I mean, that is how fundamental it is to, again, our very survival. So when we have those breaks in attachment, it's so profound and it stays with us for the rest of our lives until we heal from it. And that's the good thing, is that you can change those patterns. But attachment in general, we find that there are three basic ones. There's really four, but three main ones. There's secure attachment, where you had a very responsive, attuned parent that looked after your needs, and you were emotionally connected with them. You felt safe with them. And so that secure attachment allows you to go out in the world and create these really healthy relationships. You don't run from relationships or emotional connection. You seek them out. In distress, you reach out to others. That type of pattern is what emerges in a secure attachment, and that's what we really ideally want.
Mm-hmm.
But not everything turns out that way. But I know you know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then there's insecure attachment, or anxious attachment, where perhaps the parent wasn't as dependable. You didn't know if they were going to be there all the time, and or maybe they were really more intrusive, let's say. And so you grew up and you really weren't sure if you were going to have that secure attachment, that figure there. So you seek it out and you get a little desperate about it. And you're afraid that people are going to leave you. And so you grab on really tightly, and that can scare some people off. But you were trying to attach, which is a healthy thing, because you internally understand that you need that connection. And then, of course, there's the avoidant type. And the avoidant types, they, might have had a misattuned parent, or maybe a depressed parent, or maybe a parent who kind of was using the child to serve their own emotional needs. And so this child grows up thinking that this emotional connection is maybe too much or unpredictable or smothering, and so they try to get away from it. When they feel too much emotional connection, they want to create some distance, so they tend to build walls. And so they have a harder time, although they still need that connection and they still want that connection. It's harder for them to be in close contact, especially emotionally, with people. So those are the basic three. There's also what are the mixed? The name is escaping me right now. Where it's kind of a combination of anxious and avoidant, but those are less common and often the case, when you have a lot of heavy trauma in your early childhood. So, I mean, that's the basic description of the attachment styles. So do you want me to talk about how that fits kind of into IFS and parts work?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe like as a primer to that, why do you think anxious and avoidance can pair? Like, why do you think that's a common pairing? Or maybe it's not, but why do you think that's a common pairing? And like, as far as genders and stuff, like, are there more anxious women? Are there more anxious men? Is it kind of a division or avoidant types? Like, so as we segue into IFS, maybe talk about that. Like, why do these things happen?
Yeah, no, my understanding is that you can have, there's an equal chance of men and women being either avoidant or anxious or secure, so that it's not gender dependent.
Mm-hmm.
I think we tend to think that women are anxious and men are avoidant, but from what I understand, the data doesn't really bear that out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, oftentimes we find the avoidant and anxious people kind of coming together because the avoidant type, they seem so charming and they seem so very independent and got it all together, and they can be really attractive partners and they're fun to be around. So they can be pretty magnetic. So, those who with a more of an anxious attachment style, they can be drawn to them, but also they might be drawn to them because they look a lot like one of their parents. And so they might be repeating that pattern. They might be trying to fix that old pattern where they fix that attachment that wasn't quite secure as a child. But what happens is, and with the avoidant, they do want that love and that connection, and so they might be interested in the anxious, the person that has that anxious attachment style. And again, it might be repeating an old pattern for them as well. I think it's really interesting that a lot of times for the avoidant person, they are really confident when they have this sense of being in control. That's safety for them. And the anxious person is the one that gives up their control because they just want to feel connected. They just want to be loved. So they'll do anything. And that is reassuring to that avoidant person because they're in control. So that's, those two often come together, but it can be very tumultuous because the anxious person is always chasing and the avoidant person is always running away. And that pursuer-distancer pattern is so common in relationships. And it can be so damaging when they don't understand what's happening and they don't understand how to fix it. And so oftentimes those relationships don't last. And then they end up repeating those in their next relationships because they haven't learned what's actually going on.
Well, that's a huge question I was going to ask you as a relationship coach too, of like, so in blended families, people tend to just jump out of one scenario and fall back into a new pattern. And it's like, uh-oh. And that's why I think the divorce rate for second marriages can be often quite more grim than the first one too. And So as we transition into the internal family systems lens, I'll just let you open up and teach us. So, I mean, I have a lot of great questions, but I'm learning so much right now. So go ahead if you want.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. So, IFS, boy, where do I start? So IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, and it was created by Dick Schwartz, and he came from the family systems framework. So in family systems, we know that as a family, we work as a system together. We all influence one another, and but that also is the case internally for each individual. We all have these parts that emerge for different reasons. In general, we can say we have protector parts, and then we have what we would call exiles. So these exiles are these young parts of us that were overwhelmed, traumatized, injured in some way. So something happened that it was too much for them to handle. And so what happens is we develop these protector parts that push those young parts down so that they don't feel so sad, so overwhelmed, so frustrated. And then these protector parts start functioning instead. But they are also young because they were created when we were young. So let's see, let me think of an example. Let's say that you were made fun of because of your weight as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so shaming. And shame, we know from research, is we experience that at the same level that we experience physical pain. It is so difficult for us to feel that. And so those exiles hold that shame. So that exile gets pushed down, and then perhaps one protector emerges that is the class clown. And that, so they protect against anyone who is going to make fun of them for how they look by making jokes about their weight. And then they might also have a protector that says you can't have anything sweet or anything that's like a dessert because then you'll be fat. So you also have a protector that's kind of shaming you every time that you have that desire for a dessert. So you've got this class clown that protects against the world and then also protects against your impulses, natural impulses to eat sweet things. And then you might also have, and we have multiple protectors. You might also have an angry part that emerges every time that someone gets too close to that feeling of shame in you, or they trigger that feeling in you of shame, and then you lash out at that person. You might have another one that's a drinking one, that when you feel that deep shame, you drink to try to numb out so you don't feel that shame. So over time, we develop this whole family of parts, this internal family system, and they help us to survive. They have the best of intentions for us. They only want to protect us and help us to get through. They don't want us to feel those overwhelming feelings of shame and fear and overwhelm. But sometimes the parts can be at war with one another.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever wanted to eat that piece of chocolate cake because you were feeling this emptiness inside that you've never really understood and developed early on, and eating is your way to cope. But then you have this inner critic that shames you for wanting to eat that chocolate cake. And so those parts then can be at war, and then that really upsets our system and can put us in conflict internally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the really cool thing about internal family systems is that there's another part, and it's really not a part, it's us. and we call it the self.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to be confused with the ego, because that's not that. But the self is who we are at our core. And it's everything we aspire to be. Our self is, they talk about the 8 C's, and I don't know if I'm going to remember them all off the top of my head, but the self is compassionate. It is curious. It is courageous. It is confident, on and on and on. And it really is capable of handling just about anything. And if we can help our parts connect to that self, then we can heal. And so what IFS is all about is helping our parts be in harmony with one another, and also to connect with the self, so that these parts, because usually they're exhausted because they have been working for so long to get us through. And some of them really don't want to be working so hard anymore. And if they can understand that the self is now on board, because the self wasn't fully developed as when we were children, but now as adults, if they can recognize that the self is there and they can take over these roles, we don't need to be so hard on ourselves. We don't need to, get attention in these big dramatic ways anymore from people. That we can be in connection with self, and the self can also help heal those exiles, those young parts that were so badly hurt. And so that's a beautiful thing. And when we can be more in self, then it's also easier to connect with the other people around us, because we're not in these reactionary modes. All those reactions that we have with our partners, when we get so activated in certain situations, those are our protectors coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It's just trying to help us from getting hurt again or losing out on love. They want us to feel that we are lovable, that we are good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we can help those parts to relax and maybe take on new roles and let the self take over, then it's so much easier for us to be in relationships, in healthy relationships with others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's IFS in a nutshell. And it is beautiful. And it's, I studied, emotion-focused therapy long ago in graduate school when I was learning to be a psychologist. And of course, as someone who saw the vital importance of relationships, I saw the beauty of Sue Johnson's work, who, created this model largely. And this is so wonderful. I love this. But it was harder to implement. And she's also developed the model a lot since then. It's been a while since I've been in graduate school, but and it still is beautiful work, and I love the theory. But what I have learned from other people, because I haven't really practiced EFT with clients, but is that it's hard to do, or they leave their sessions just feeling exhausted. And so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's just it's hard. But with IFS, which is, again, based largely on those principles of the importance of attachment, but it's a different process. They found it so much more effective, and they left their sessions feeling energized instead of drained and wanting to leave the profession. So it's really just such a gift to our world, because we have more people who can do it and do it effectively and not get burnt out from it. And we can help a lot more people that way.
Yeah. I have a lot of comments there, like Sue Johnson. I think she wrote Hold Me Tight, right? I think that's one of the books that she wrote. She talks about the protest polka, right? Like, why is it that one partner just becomes inflamed with rage or anxiety or sensitivity over something that's so trivial? and she talks about like understanding that when someone's triggered like that, they're literally fighting for their life, because to be loved feels, I mean, we need love. We have to have that social contact, you know? And so her work's really cool. And then it's funny with parts work. Um, I have good friends that I hang with. I'm part of a men's group. I'm also 16 years sober, so I've been really entrenched in the recovery movement. And I have two friends that I go to dinner with every Sunday night, and we've named all the parts, and so we call the life coach my guru. And my friends will screw with me. They're like, hey, level with us. We don't need the guru tonight. Like, how are you really feeling? Like, I had a friend interrupt me last week. One of my good friends interrupted me and said, hey, you're bypassing here. You don't have to compare this. You don't have to be the guy that reads the personal development book and you know, transcends it all. Like, I want to know how you really feel. I know you're holding a lot back. So I think that, and the fact that so many men, and I'll kind of, you know, we can kind of segue here too. There's so many men who are hiding, and they're in so much pain. I have these amazing conversations with all sorts of people, but also clients. I had a client conversation recently, and I wanted to be like, hey, it's all of us. We have these models in mental health, and this was my big frustration with mental health. And after, you know, maybe thinking about going to graduate school, someone said, why don't you check out ICF and do a coaching program, you know, because I wanted to do a podcast and I wanted to do whiteboard and seminars, and I love meditation and yoga. And so it's one of the big frustrations is we've kind of got this biochemical model, right? Which, and I'm not pro or against medication, you know, if it's necessary, but we've got this biochemical model, right? And then we've got this model of the cognitive model. And then, you know, where the thing I love about the parts work is that so often I hear personality disorders are permanent or attachment can't be changed and all this stuff. And that just breaks my heart, because as someone who has transformed, I quit drinking, I quit taking drugs. I weighed 300 pounds 10 years ago. You know, I have massive morbid obesity. Like, as someone who has overcome so much, and, you know, I studied philosophy and psychology in college. I'm an ICF trained coach. Like, people can get well. And you know, it's almost like shared vulnerability has the power to heal, because shared vulnerability lets you in and it says, I'm not perfect. I'm not the domineering Freud psychologist. I'm not judging you, right? And so I see that in the coaching community of like, this is about positive psychology in a way, but it's really just about forward motion. The past is so important, but regardless of the past, like when my exile flies out, you know, or there's this massive trauma response from old stuff, what I think people need more than anything, more than, you know, they need validation. They just need people to listen. Just hold space for me. Just receive this. And oh God, I wish more men would get involved in recovery movements and men's group and just know that it's okay. It's okay to feel all this stuff, because if we don't feel it and we don't have that platonic male love, then what happens is it's going to come out. It comes out in the anger. And I think that's what's so tragic about where our culture is today, you know? With mass shooters and stuff, you know, it's so scary that there's so many men that are in so much pain. So what do you think is the first path to healing when someone's going to step into this work? Maybe it's through marriage counseling, maybe it's through their partner's dragging them into something, they've heard about coaching, whatever, they go to a retreat. Where's the first place they should start with figuring out their parts and kind of, you know, naming things and finding what's going on internally?
Yeah, I first want to just say how beautiful I think that it is that your friends really are we're trying to help you make space for your own humanity. I just think that was beautiful, and I would love to see more of that in the world. So right on with you right there. I think that's wonderful, and I agree with all of what you just said. But the first step, I think that we need to meet people where they are. So, you know, that's one of the other things that I really love about IFS is that, you know, I, as an IFS practitioner, I follow your lead. You are the expert. I'm just the expert on the process. So I don't diagnose. I am not above you. You are the ultimate expert on you. I just help you gain some awareness first. And so, what we might talk about if I were working with a couple is, what's going on for you right now? What is most present for you? What do you want to work on? So it's absolutely about what they need, and then we start from there. And we do some tracking about what's really going on and help them slow down, so we really understand the patterns that emerge. And then we help them understand what was so activating there, and what's the story that you're telling yourself about your partner, about your relationship, about yourself. So we really help people understand, and we call it the U-turn. So as we do this interaction, it's like, okay, I'm gonna start working with you right now. Now you partner, I want you to listen and stay with us. But what's going on? What's so activating for you? And then again, slow down the pattern, really understand what's happening underneath. And then we can start to bring out those parts and identify what parts are at work here that are keeping you in conflict. What can we learn about them? What do they need us to know? Again, we never demonize them because they want the best for us. So that's where we start. Again, that's for a couple.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. So here's a question for you. Do you think just about anybody can make it if the couple's committed to the work?
I try not to make blanket statements like that. If they both want to make it work, then probably. But yeah, I have a hard time saying 100% yes or no. But I think there's a very good chance if they are both invested. I think oftentimes the problem is that many couples wait so long to get help that one person's checked out. And so and then they're really not willing to put in the work, because it does take work.
Yeah. So when we talk about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, what do you commonly see? So let's maybe talk about men's needs and women's needs. And I know that's a broad topic. And then also, what are the complaints you're hearing from women? And what are the complaints you're hearing from men? Like, if you just want to give us some insight into really what the modern couple's dealing with and what you're seeing on your end as someone who specializes in this.
Yeah. So, gosh, I don't like to generalize too much because, of course, not all men do this and not all women do that. But there are trends, certainly. And what I see a lot of times with men is that they feel like they're just so surprised that their partner is so unhappy or maybe wants to end the relationship. They don't know what they've done. And perhaps the female partner is saying, but I've been trying to tell you for years. I need you to listen more. I need you to connect at an emotional level. And so many men at an early age were shamed for being emotional, showing that vulnerable side of them. So they pushed that down, and then they never learned how to engage emotionally with people. One of the things that I also specialize in is sex and intimacy. And I make a lot of TikTok videos about how to improve that intimacy. And I get a lot of men saying, oh, tell this to my wife, that, she should have sex with me more. It's like, but they're missing the point, because I'm also posting about how that emotional intimacy is integral to that sexual intimacy. They're intertwined. And it's so many women and men that don't want that sexual intimacy if there's not that emotional connection. So helping men learn how to become first aware of their emotions, and then start to connect with them, because it's a pretty big deal. It's pretty hard if you're only doing this for the first time at the age of 40, if you say this is, it can be at any age, but I think that a lot of men, because they need to connect, so the only way they know how to connect with a partner is through sex. And while I appreciate that need to connect and to feel that with their partner, that's not the whole picture, and that's not going to be very rewarding, or it's not going to make their partner feel very connected if it's just about the sex, and it's not about the emotional intimacy either. Yeah.
So how do you think kids come into play? I think that one of the things that's really helped me is to understand that it's connecting with my kids and being a father and being really emotionally invested in them is actually what really lights my wife up, to be a servant, and I know the old school language is to provide and protect, but also too, when we talk about protection and providing, that can be emotional needs. Like for my son has high touch needs. He's very, back in the 1980s, if they had the terminology, I was a sensory kid. So one of the things with my son is helping him understand his emotions. And so the rules that we use are all feelings are okay. Certain behaviors aren't, but all feelings are welcome and okay. And understanding, what I had to learn, I'm 40, it took me a long time. I've been with my wife for 22 years. And so helping me understand that like how my wife feels about me is, for men, it's like, it will often be how she feels about herself when she's with you. And maybe that's a blanket statement that you don't like. I understand, it's like, it's helping guys understand. And I do this with men clients, and I try and help women clients understand this too. It's how your partner feels about you when they're with you. And if your partner feels, the old school is men need to be respected, women need to be cherished. And those are old school terminologies. There's a grain of truth there. Maybe there's a lot of truth there, but how would you advise men? So, we make the assumption that it's always the man with the high libido and they feel like they're left out in the cold. But if you look online and you talk to people, there's a lot of women who aren't satisfied and hurt badly in that realm too. So what would you tell couples who are in that place that are trying to move beyond that and really connect on that really emotional and almost spiritual level in that way?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. So what about, you mean the couples who are struggling sexually and trying to connect in that way?
Well, yeah, or either viewpoint, like what would you tell a man? Like we just talked about how men don't understand. They need to connect emotionally. They need to make sure that she's doing well too. Like what would you tell a man who's just just can't believe, why is this happening?
Yeah, I would really want to understand his need to connect and why he wants to connect through sex. What does that get him? So I would probably start there, because I think that that's probably going to help him see that it helps him feel into that that need for attachment and that emotional connection, that actually does give that to him, and then really helping him to understand that there are other ways to do that, and that sometimes sex can be used as an avoidance technique that actually can be a part to push away bad feelings. And so that might be going on for him, and then understanding why that came about. So really, again, meeting them where they are. And that takes you down a path, and you can learn so much about someone, and you can learn so much about yourself if you really allow that process. And then with his partner being there and seeing and hearing, oh, this is really what's going on. This is why he's always wanting sex, and connecting emotionally is so difficult. Oh, okay, now I get it. But that awareness, that connection to parts, is a really great first step.
Yeah, I always say awareness is recovery. Like the birthplace of healing is being aware, oh, we've got something going on here, or even just radically accepting all of that stuff within us, all the parts within us, and just, well, what does this person want? What does this fragment of me want? You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, But going back to your question about kids, it's such a big one. It's such an important one. I love to recommend to parents The Self-Driven Child is a book. Great book. And so many parents, they want the best for their kids. So they're trying to guide them or really even control them to, you got to get good grades. You have to have the right friends. You have to get into the right college. You have to behave in a certain way so that you don't push people away. And yet that doesn't really teach kids anything. That just teaches them that they're not good enough and they have to do more. And what kids really need is that emotional validation. Connecting and having a parent, feeling that your parent understands how you're feeling and cares about that is just huge. And so many kids don't get that. But then, when you feel understood, then you're more likely to talk through, hey, I have this problem. And then, you can help your child problem solve and figure out the solutions, without trying to control them and trying to control their life. So yeah, that emotional connection is really big. The other thing that I always like to remind people, and this can be tough, but it comes from Ross Greene, and he says that kids do, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, is kids do well when they can. So basically, if they're not doing well, there's a reason. There's something getting in their way. And so it's, your job as a parent or, maybe to help with a therapist or whatever is to figure out, what is so challenging for them? What is getting in their way? But so often it's about that emotional connection.
Yeah, I think when I was starting my coaching practice, I was talking to a trained counselor and I said, I was talking about parental guilt, and feeling like you got to get it right and you're worried and you want to get them in the right preschool and you want to make sure they're developing and that they have social skills and you're advocating for them. And sometimes you're like, well, am I being too soft? Do I need more authority? And we embraced attachment style parenting really early on. But I was talking to this counselor and she said, I'm not too worried about people who have some guilt. I'm worried about the people that have no guilt whatsoever and are just angry. Can't figure out why they're teenagers addicted to drugs after all they've done for them.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's usually a lack of awareness, or just not wanting to see it because it's so shameful and so hurtful for them that they that it's hard to see your child suffering and hard to think that you might have had something to do with it. I mean, that is that's hard. I mean, because none of us is a perfect parent. None of us. And so if we can kind of join together, like you were saying earlier, and be vulnerable about that with others who, are able to admit to their imperfection, then that helps us a lot. That really, and can help us be a better parent.
What would you say? So my kids are 9 and 5, and where we're at, the first year of COVID, we went to virtual learning, and then both my wife and I were working outside the home and all this stuff. So how do we recover? Because I know that it was super stressful for us, and I guarantee you it was stressful for our kids. And I have friends that their kids are in high school and basically went virtual learning from like 7th and 8th grade and popped into high school in person, and like they have no idea how to behave. They feel lost. They feel chaotic. So what advice would you give to parents right now? They've got young kids and they're trying to recover from really, I mean, the first year of COVID was so strange. How would you advise those of us who are still really in the thick, that young season, to, maybe let go of the guilt, but also recover? Like, I know my kids have complex needs based off doing that, based off the pandemic. How can I support them right now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was such a tough time. And I will just say that I am not a child psychologist. I do understand. I've learned a lot along the way. And I have worked a lot with teens, and I worked a lot with teens during the pandemic, and it was just so tough. And again, I would say it's just continuing that connection. One-on-one time is really wonderful. Touch is really important. Um, I think that, even though we don't really think of our kids going to school and touching one another, there is some of that contact, with friends and, sports or PE or, whatever it
Hmm.
is, but they were so isolated. They really needed that physical touch. So any way that you can incorporate that, either by hugs or by, wrestling or any of that stuff, that is so good for kids' development. Um, but then again, also just that one-on-one time, that time as a family, is I think the best thing that we can offer our kids. Um, there are I worked as an academic coach for a little while, so there are things that we can do to help them increase their focus and help with organization and things like that. But I think it mostly comes down to that emotional connection with you.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of the current trends? Coaching's exploding. The ICF seems to be. I mean, I've been reading their stuff. They're trying to get stricter on their gold standard of what the code of ethics is and how we need to prepare people. I'm really excited about where coaching's going because, I can have my baccalaureate at work. I can do a certification. I can learn more about yoga. Like I've been reading The Body Keeps Score, and I can learn
Mm.
these different modalities. I'm really trying to become trained in being trauma informed, or maybe go to a workshop for parts, to get deeper training on parts work. What are you excited about from the vantage point of coaching, and what are you concerned about?
Hmm. Um, I think coaching is wonderful because there are so many people out there who don't necessarily either need or want therapy, but they can benefit from support in learning how they can make their lives better. So, maybe it's not that they need or want to heal necessarily from something, but they want to get over there and they don't know how. And coaches can be really effective in so many different areas in helping people just expand their minds, and really examine some of the ways that they've been doing things and learn that there's a different way. Um, I think we all could use a coach in our lives to help us figure out how to get to the next level.
Hmm.
Um, and I love that, as a coach, I can do couples work, because in couples work, even as a therapist, you're not diagnosing.
Hmm.
You're just helping them to bring their relationship to a place where it feels more joyful and more connected. So I
Hmm.
love that. The concerns that I have is that I do see some coaches who don't want to deal with any of that sad stuff, any of that
Yeah.
anger stuff. And that tells me that they haven't worked on their own. They haven't done their own work, because they've got some fear around it. And those feelings of anger, grief, and sadness, and jealousy, and resentment, all those things, they're part of who we are. They're part of what
Hmm.
makes us human. And to deny that is denying our humanity. And also teaching people that those aren't okay to feel. It's not okay to feel that. Um, and those types of feelings, that catabolic energy, as we might call it, in the coaching world, it doesn't just go away. It lives in our body. And if you ever read Gabor Mate's, work, um, those types of emotions unaddressed lead to disease,
Yeah.
um, and also just really takes the joy out of our lives.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I've seen that too many times, and it's sad. Um, of course, then there's the movie Inside Out,
Oh,
and
I
those are
love that movie.
wonderful. It's a wonderful movie that says, sadness can be the portal to happiness and joy, but you have to allow yourself to feel that in order to get there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really beautiful that people are starting to embrace that modality. And I think it's really cool to go into the coaching framework because it is, you know, I got into it because, you know, I knew a lady, she coached me and she did a lot of deep work and she went virtual in 2016. And she was like, the future is going to be working with people all over the world and, you know, and connecting
Mm,
with people. And I mean, she was classically trained and licensed, but her approach was very much like, I think there's certain people who once you've gained their confidence and they can actually talk about things and they're not completely blocked and checked out, there's something really magical that can happen. But I think there's probably a base layer level of self-awareness and things that need to happen so someone's ready for that. Like, you know, recently I heard just a tagline on the beginning of a podcast and I turned it off immediately. It was like, successful people don't talk about the problem. They focus on success. And that just made me cringe. And I was like, goodbye, you know, and just like, I do think there's something to be said about putting it out there and processing it because it's real. It's a part of you. And when someone's in the middle of a trigger, you know, I have acquaintances that I love to BS with and be sarcastic with and have a good time. And so a couple of years ago, I had an event where one thing happened and I was shamed and I was embarrassed. And it was like for 2 hours, I couldn't even focus. I was so trapped in my head. And, you know,
mm,
sometimes the only way is, I mean, for anyone, but so the path of least resistance for some men is anger and rage. It's like, get away from me, you know? And I think that like, you know, that can be really terrifying for a man or for a woman too. Anytime you feel like you're losing control over your energy. So
mm.
I'm just glad that more people are having this conversation. I hope this is a trend in well-being or mental health or whatever you want to call it. But I'm really excited that more coaches are talking about this stuff. And I think that it's good that more people are getting aware of mental health. But I also think there's so much stuff out there on the blanket terms are like narcissism, empath, codependent, trauma, and all this stuff. And so I see people getting hyper focused on it. Do you think there's a danger in people becoming like obsessed with therapeutic concepts or like when one partner's doing a ton of therapy work and the other's not? Do you see that dynamic ever unfolding at all within your
Mm.
work?
Yeah, getting obsessed with that world. I mean, I think that there's a lot of learning that people are doing, and like you said, awareness is so is can just really open up your world, and
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, gateway to growth, you know, so to speak. Um, I think it's easy though to not necessarily for people who aren't trained to know what is good information sometimes and what's bad information.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have to say, you know, there's a lot of stuff about narcissism that I'm seeing lately. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really good for people to be aware of unhealthy relationships, but it's also really easy to suddenly have that as an easy way to dismiss somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say the really unpopular thing is that um, uh, narcissists are people too, and they need love
Mm-hmm.
too. We don't need to have them in our lives. You know, we need to make sure that we have boundaries so that we protect ourselves. Um, but to demonize anybody, I think is dangerous, and it just polarizes us even more.
Yeah.
So I get worried about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you had another part of your question that I'm not remembering. Please remind me.
Oh, I don't even think I know.
Okay.
We were pretty deep there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess as we finish up, you know, where can we find you online? And how about this? Tell us who you like to work with. Like if I'm gonna hire an awesome relationship coach, why should we contact Karin?
Hmm. Um, I love to work with people who are invested and who really want to grow, and they're ready to do the work. And it can be any kind of people, any kind of relationship structure. Um, it doesn't matter really who you are as long as you're really willing to dive in. that's where there's just so much opportunity. And yeah, I love working with all kinds of people. You can find me online, drcalde.com, drcalde.com. I'm actually working on an online course for those in midlife who want to reinvent their sex lives or reignite their sex lives. So that's coming up in the next, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but hopefully February, March. So I'll have some more information about that. I've got some information about step families, and in general about relationships on my website. On Instagram, I'm the Love and Connection Coach. And on TikTok, I'm Love and Connection Coach. So you can find lots of information about me there.
Well, awesome. This was an amazing conversation, and I'm sure I could plan another episode in 6 months or so. I had like a whole bunch of other questions I wanted to talk about Freud and Jung and Skinner and Carl Rogers and all this stuff, but I'm sure we could go really deep on that one day and get kind of existential. But thanks so much for coming on, Karin.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.